Trigger warning. This podcast deals with themes of death, mental health, and murder.
It is a brisk autumn evening. A group of 4 or 5 children walk down the road of a suburban Kirkland neighborhood. They had heard from their friends about the house on the middle of the street. As they approach the house, the first thing they see is a giant skeleton towering over the neighborhood. It is perched upon the roof of the house and illuminated by a 500-watt floodlight to draw attention to the macabre display. The windows of the house are boarded up with old fence slats. Plastic skeletons climb the walls as if attempting to breach the home's entrance in violation of the "keep out" and danger signs nailed haphazardly to the boards. As they get closer, they see a fence made out of PVC and painted black, 6 feet high with spikes fashioned out of tight tent spikes. On either side of the fence are pillars with the words Exubis Cemetery, a respectful nod to the Native American lands that we now occupy. In the yard, among the ghouls and zombies, are a pair of headstones cut from wood with letters scrawled upon them. One reads, Charles Murphy, age 10, murdered 1919. Another, Francis Murphy, died Woodley Insane Asylum, 1921. The children stopped to take selfies of themselves standing in front of this Halloween display. Photos destined to be immortalized on Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, whatever other social media subscribed to and shared. Little thought is given to the words on the fake cemetery headstones, if they are read at all. Little do they realize that these headstones stand as monuments to real, tragic events that happened over 100 years ago. Unlike the statues and monuments which depict the villains of our history in a glamorous light, these monuments provide us a glimpse of people who were victims. Were they victims of bad luck, or malicious intent, or a childhood prank gone horribly wrong? We will probably never know. But to understand them a little better, we need to turn back the clock to 100 years ago.
Sarah Murphy was my great-grandmother. She was born in Scotland in 1915. On Sunday, April 6th, 1919, when Sarah was just 4 years old, her parents, Hugh and Elizabeth, decided to visit Hugh's brother, Francis, and his new wife. Francis had already had a difficult life so far. His first wife, Anne, had died of cancer at the young age of 25. He was left to raise 3 young children, James, Francis Jr., and Charles. At the time of Anne's death, the youngest child was but 2 years old. Things were looking up for Francis, though. He had just married his new wife, Mary, just a year before. You can imagine that at the time of the visit, things were very chaotic. In addition to my great-grandmother, they would have brought their own children, 14-year-old James, 12-year-old Catherine, Hugh Jr., who was 11, 8-year-old Margaret, 7-year-old Elizabeth, and 6-year-old Patrick. Francis and Mary would be contending with the 14-year-old James, 13-year-old Francis, and 10-year-old Charles. At some point, we do know that 11-year-old Hugh Jr. and 10-year-old Charles went to play at the home quarry. The quarry was about a quarter of a mile south, down Holmby Road, just on the other side of today's New Edinburgh Road. It was an abandoned quarry with 50-foot cliffs into deep water. Tagging along with them was my great-grandmother, Sarah, just 4 years old. We do not know exactly what happened that day. Sarah took the details of that day to her grave. The only thing that she ever told anyone was that Hugh Jr. pulled her aside after the incident and told her, "If you ever tell anyone what happened here today, I will kill you." And she never did, except to say that she witnessed her brother, Hugh Jr., murder their cousin. Many decades later, we can attempt to put some of the pieces of the puzzle together. A newspaper article from the Hamilton Advisor, dated April 12, 1919, tells of the tragedy. The body of Charles Murphy, aged 10 years, son of Francis Murphy, 37, New Rose, Knackerty, Uddingston, was recovered from the home quarry, Uddingston, on Monday forenoon. It seems that along with another boy, the deceased had been bird nesting on Sunday afternoon on a tree which overhangs the quarry, had missed his grip, and fell into deep water, about 50 feet below. One theory is that Hugh and Charles got into a fight, and when they went to home quarry, Charles was either thrown or fell into the quarry. Either way, it would look like Hugh was responsible in some way. Francis, Charles's father, did not shy away from a fist fight. Hugh was probably scared to death of Francis and his own family's possible reaction. This on top of the trauma of watching his cousin drown. Late at night, perhaps after the family wondered where Charles was, Hugh tells the family that he and Charles were quote-unquote bird nesting on a tree over the quarry, and Charles lost his grip and fell in. The family rushed to the quarry and found Charles floating in the quarry, dead. Authorities came and pronounced him dead by asphyxiation at 20 minutes after midnight on Monday, April 7th, 1919. It was the day from hell for everyone, especially Hugh Jr. It is understandable that everyone would focus on Hugh and his apparent irresponsibility, no matter how they interpreted the situation. Add lots of alcohol and two fathers in shock, and one can only guess what happened that night. It would be hard to script the probable physical and emotional violence that occurred that night. It must have been terrible. It would change Hugh's life forever. And Charles's father, Francis, never recovered as well. On 28 November 1921, Francis Murphy died at Woodley Asylum. He was 42 years old. The notes on his death were, died of exhaustion from melancholia agitans / organic brain disease, manic despairing, constant flight of ideas, persecution mute / spoken, and mixed state bipolar. Records from the asylum state, quote, he is dull, depressed, hypochondriac. He is restless and lacking in concentration. He says he wishes he were dead. He may be dangerous to himself, and he cannot look after himself, end quote. He has no other medical issues, but is diagnosed with, quote, organic brain disease, existing cause of insanity, alcohol.
Returning to the present day, we see the children departing the house decorated for Halloween. The fake tombstones memorializing Charles Murphy and his father Francis are the only monuments that exist to help us remember their lives. Both Charles and Francis were buried in unmarked graves thousands of miles away in Scotland. The children are laughing now, trying to prove to each other that they were not really scared of the house. After all, Halloween is just about make-believe and a time to leave the real horrors that exist in life far behind. As the children fade off into the distance, we see a new group approach the Halloween display. An older man holding the hand of a young child who appears to be about 13 years old. The child is wearing a jersey with the name Cress printed on the back of it. The older man says to the child, "Come along now, Pat. You know that this is not real. Ghosts are not real."
This podcast is based on true events. They have been pieced together from newspaper articles, birth and death certificates, and other public records, as well as the eyewitness account of my great-grandmother. The ending may be a little obscure. It may be a little too easy and obvious to have people who the listener might assume to be Charles and his father approach the house. Instead, I decided to mix in a little bit of local history. Pat Kress was a 13-year-old boy who was found murdered in Kingsgate on April 30th, 1983, following a sleepover at his friend's house. This murder took place about a mile from where the setting of this story takes place, my home. Pat's murder remains unsolved to this day.